Hey gamers, welcome to Treantmonk's Temple, where knowledge is power. So 5th edition's been around for a few years now, and we all have a pretty good idea of what the best and the worst spells are in the game. That said, I've noticed that some spells seem to be regularly overrated and underrated by players. Today, let's talk about first level spells. Which ones are overrated, which ones are underrated, what are the best, and what are the worst. So let's get started. So let's start with a little disclaimer. I'm not telling you how to have fun in your game, and these are obviously all just my opinions. That said, let's get started with the worst and just get it out of the way. When it comes to the worst spells in the game, I have to say at first level, at number 3 comes in Arms of Hadar. When it comes to this spell, I don't even know where to start. I guess we could start with the range. It's going to target every creature within 10 feet of your caster. Now that's fine if you don't have any allies within 10 feet, but usually you do, so that means friendly fire. Secondly, the damage. 2d6 damage? That's not impressive for a first level spell, even an area of effect spell. Spells like even Burning Hands or Thunderwave are going to do more damage regularly. Finally, you get one secondary effect with this spell, which is that enemies hit with it can't take reactions to the beginning of their next turn. And that's all well and good if they fail their saving throw. And that saving throw is... Strength! Ugh. So that brings us to our number 2 spot on the worst spell list for first level spells. And that spell is Witch Bolt. Witch Bolt is a spell that has very few redeeming features. Its range isn't good, at 30 feet. It uses your concentration. It's single target. And the damage isn't good. 1d12 damage at first level is not good damage. That's 6.5 damage, and it requires a to-hit roll. And if that to-hit roll misses, it does nothing. Then round after round you do d12 damage, the same terrible damage, using your concentration. Spell doesn't even scale well. You get to 2nd level, 3rd level with this spell, you increase the damage on the first round only. So then on the 2nd and the 3rd round and the 4th, you're still doing that terrible d12 damage, even though you spent a higher level slot to set that up. When it comes to spells that probably shouldn't make your spell list, Witch Bolt is the 2nd worst. So let's get this over with. The number 1 worst first level spell in D&D is Illusory Script. When it comes to rituals, I usually like to give a pass. After all, you can cast them without using a spell slot. I mean, what's the harm of having it in your spellbook in the first place? But this spell really is pretty much useless. First off, it's going to cost you 10 gold pieces just to cast it. And what does it do? Well, it creates a writing that you can read and your allies can read, and no one else can, for 10 days. Now that sounds like a spell that maybe has some kind of creative use that we're missing, but in all my discussions with people, no one seems to be able to come up with a practical use for this spell that's not just wildly circumstantial. And so, for that reason, it gains number 1 as my worst first level spell in the game. Well, that was a downer, so let's try to pick it up a notch and go a little more positive and talk about some underrated spells at first level. And there are lots to choose from, but I've narrowed it down to my top 3. And 3rd of those is Compelled Duel. When it comes to paladins, we often think of their spell slots as smite slots, and we forget that they have some pretty good spell options there. Compelled Duel is one of these options. Compelled Duel is a bonus action casting, which means it's not going to interfere with your attacks. And it targets one creature, and if that creature fails a wisdom saving throw, will have disadvantage to attack anyone but you. Furthermore, if they try to move more than 30 feet away from you, they have to make a second wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, they're unable to do so. the wizard and sorcerer will thank you for this kind of control. One of the great things about this spell is, unlike a lot of other spells, they don't get a saving throw every round to end the effect. Even if they make their saving throw to allow them to move more than 30 feet away from the caster, that still doesn't end the effect. It lasts for a full minute, so that's going to be the entire combat, but you've created significant control for your party. That's a pretty good deal for a first level spell. So for underrated spells, number 2 is Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Tasha's is a very potent spell for the level, and it deserves more love than it gets. When we're talking about 4th level spells that lock down one creature and give them a saving throw every round, I'm no fan. But if you can give me the same with a 1st level spell, that's another matter entirely, and that's what Tasha's does. With a failed wisdom save, the creature is incapacitated and prone. That's out of the action. They get a saving throw every round, or a save if they're attacked with advantage. But why would I be attacking them? The whole point of the spell is to separate 2 enemies. Incapacitate one so you can deal with the other. Then when the other is dealt with, you deal with the first. That's divide and conquer. And this spell will do that even at high levels. You can incapacitate creatures at any challenge rating as long as they fail their saving throw, which makes this spell underrated. As for the number 1 underrated spell for 1st level, I'm going to save that one. Instead, let's switch gears a bit and talk about overrated spells. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the number 3 overrated spell is Chromatic Orb. Now, this spell seems to be popular with wizards and sorcerers who consider themselves blasters, but I'm not sure why. It's not a good blast spell. I mean, just compare it to Guiding Bolt for a minute. It does less damage, it has less range, and Guiding Bolt has the secondary effect, providing advantage on the next attack. Chromatic Orb offers none of these things, and if it misses, it does nothing. So that brings us to our 2nd most overrated spell in the game, and for that, I choose Beast Bond. This spell isn't a bad spell, but it is overrated, and the reason it's overrated is because it's often considered the fix for the Beastmaster Ranger, and it's not. The Beastmaster Ranger can use his pet to attack by using his action. By casting Beast Bond on their first action, their pet now gets advantage on attacks. An advantage on attacks is fine, but it's still doing lousy damage. And he's using his concentration to keep it up, and he has to be within 5 feet of the enemy. That's a lot of disadvantages, and it doesn't fix the Beastmaster Ranger, which is why this spell is overrated. So that brings us to our number 1 most overrated 1st level spell in D&D. And this one is going to get me in all kinds of trouble. All kinds of trouble. But I just want you to hear me out. Because in my opinion, the most overrated 1st level spell in D&D is Healing Word. Okay, please stop writing the angry comment and just give me a minute to explain. I am not saying that Healing Word is a bad spell. In fact, I think Healing Word is a good spell. I just happen to think it's a highly overrated spell. I've heard people say that this is the best healing spell in the game. I've even heard people say it's the best spell in the game, period. These are both wild overstatements. It's usually based on this thought that there's no other way to bring up an ally who's gone down with something as cheap as a bonus action. The fact is that's just not the case, and there are alternatives that are superior that I'm going to talk about later in this video. So, for those reasons, I consider this to be the most overrated spell at 1st level in the game. Okay, we're going to switch gears and get more positive here. Let's talk about the best spells at 1st level in the game. Now, narrowing it down to just 3 is actually really hard. Spells like Dissonant Whispers or Armor of Agathis should really make a best of list, but they just can't if you're going to go down to only 3. So, that said, my pick for the 3rd best 1st level spell in D&D is Absorb Elements. There are a few ways to gain resistance to elemental damage within the spell system. Fortunately, the best way is a first level spell. Absorb Elements is just a reaction to cast, and it's going to give you the resistance you need, whether it be fire, or cold, or acid, or lightning, or thunder, to the beginning of your next round. Furthermore, if you happen to be a melee character, and this is kind of a minor point, you can then attack with a weapon and do an additional 1d6 of that damage type. The main thing though is it's the defense you need when you need it. And when you're a spellcaster, that's exactly what you need. That's why Absorb Elements gets my spot for the third best first level spell in D&D. Alright, so that brings us to our second best spell for first level in the game. So our runner-up best spell for first level is Shield. So this one's pretty simple. I mean, I've already explained why I thought Absorb Elements was the third best first level spell in the game. And Shield's the second best first level spell in the game for the exact same reason. It's because it's the defense you need when you need it for a reaction. And the reason it's better than Absorb Elements is simple. You just take more physical attacks than energy attacks. Shield is the kind of spell that's great for somebody who's a primary caster. It's also a great spell for somebody who's in melee. It really just is good for anyone who has it on their spell list, and anyone who doesn't tries to get it. That's why Shield is my number 2 pick for best first level spell in the game. So I have 2 more spells to go over. The best first level spell in the game, and the most underrated first level spell in the game. So let's start with the best. And my pick for the number 1 best first level spell in the game is, by a wide margin, Find Familiar. Alright, I'm going to get comfortable here, because I love talking about this spell. Find Familiar is such a great spell. Only on the wizard list, but if you're an arcane trickster or an eldritch knight, it really should be your default choice for your first level, first spell you pick. Here's why. Number 1, Surveillance. A familiar can take the form of a swimming creature, of a flying creature, of a climbing creature. And the form appears natural. So you can send your hawk 100 feet in the air, and you can look through its eyes, or 100 feet ahead, or maybe a rat that scurries 100 feet down that small tunnel, or under the door, or a frog that swims through the water to see what creatures are in there. This saves you and your party from that danger. It also works as a better scout than the average rogue. Secondly, let's talk about combat. In combat, your familiar can take actions on its own. It does not require you a bonus action to tell it what to do. It has its own initiative and it can take actions. The only action it can't do is an attack action. That gives you all kinds of options. The first and most obvious is the help action. Sending your familiar to do the help action can give any member of your party advantage on 1 attack per round. That's a pretty big deal. Think about this. Let's say you're playing an arcane trickster and you've taken Find Familiar as your spell. That familiar can give you advantage on your only attack every round, which sets you up for sneak attack every round. That's amazing. Now sometimes the enemy might target your familiar and then your familiar dies. So what? You cast it again as a ritual after the battle and you get your familiar back. And what you've done is you've taken away one of the attacks of the enemy that could have been on you or another party member. That's a good deal. This only scratches the surface of what you can use a familiar for. And I will mention one more thing before the end of this video on Find Familiar. But for now, let's move on. So I've been saving this one till the end, and there's a reason why that will be explained soon enough. But the most underrated spell at first level in the game, in my opinion, is Goodberry. So obviously this is going to tie back into why I said Healing Word was overrated. So Healing Word heals 1 ally, 1d4 plus your spellcasting modifier, once. So after the first few levels, what that means is Healing Word is going to bring up 1 ally, with a few enough hit points that one more hit and they're going to go right back down again. It's still a good action. And you can still get your main action where you can cast a cantrip or some other non-spell action. Now let's think about Goodberry. According to the Dungeon Master's Guide, you can use your action to feed somebody else a potion. Stands to reason that the same logic applies to a Goodberry. So who's got extra actions to go around? Well, how about your familiar? So let's say you give your familiar 10 Goodberries. Let's say your familiar is an owl. So an ally goes down, or you go down. Your familiar flies to you, uses its action to give you a Goodberry, and you're back up to 1 hit point. It can do this 10 times with one spell. That means 10 allies go up. Now, not only is 10 hit points more than you would expect from a first level spell, but the fact that it can be separated into 10 different heals is what makes it truly potent. Now think about this too. If your familiar is the one delivering these Goodberries, then that means that you don't use your bonus action. You're not using any action at all. This is your familiar taking an action. In fact, once you start thinking of these combos, then you start wondering, why do I only have one character in my party who has Find Familiar? Maybe I should have 2 and give them each 5 Goodberries. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, the combination is staggeringly good. And it really makes Healing Word kind of redundant. And that's it. That's all the first level spells that I think are overrated and underrated, and the ones I think that are the best, and the ones that I think that are the worst. If you want to comment below and tell me why I'm wrong, please do. But what I would really like you to do is hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you want to share this, I'd appreciate that too. But in the meantime, you know what to do. We might as well sit back, relax, and have some fun, because D&D's for everyone.